Constantine was the first Roman emperor who practiced Christianity. However, he did not always worship Jesus Christ. Constantine was born February 27, 272, in present-day Serbia. His father, Constantius I, was a military officer who would later become the Roman emperor. His only connection to Christianity, which was illegal in the Roman Empire at the time, was through his mother, Helena. However, he worshipped the sun god. In 312, Constantine experienced a life-changing event that in turn changed the lives of Christians in the Roman Empire forever. After Diocletian, a persecutor of Christians, ruled the empire, a major power struggle occurred. This power struggle was to be solved in a battle. Constantine, who led one side of the fight, praised to the Son of God, leading him to victory. He did so because before the battle, he had a vision promising him that he would be victorious through a special sign, a Chi-Rho, or the first two Greek letters for Christ, which looks like a capital XP in English. As soon as Constantine saw this, he trusted it. In the meantime, the Roman Senate erected an arch crediting Constantine's victory to the sun god. But Constantine truly believed that the Christian God led him to victory, even though the odds were against him and his small army, shocking the anti-Christian Senate. As the new Roman emperor, Constantine shares his rule with General Licinius, who rules the eastern part of the empire while he controlled the western part. In 313, Constantine, a firm believer in Christ, made Christianity legal through the Edict of Milan. This ensured that Christians could not be punished by law for practicing their faith, moving the religion to above ground or legitimate status. Later, he gave more privileges to the church, such as exempting the clergy from taxes and building numerous churches in areas such as Rome and Palestine. Constantine became the single emperor of the Roman Empire by defeating Licinius. He then decided to move the capital to New Rome, also known as Byzantium or Constantinople, located in modern-day Istanbul, Turkey. As leader, Constantine saw religion as a way to unite his people, so he started interfering with church matters, and church and state became intertwined. This had a major impact on the church because it allowed Christians to worship freely without the worry of persecution for once. It also showed Christians that there was no need for tension between faith and government. Although he supported Christianity for the major part of his life, Constantine was not baptized until shortly before his death in 337. Constantine, the first Christian emperor of the Roman Empire, ended persecution and earned the well-deserved name Constantine the Great. Constantine teaches us to trust in God wholeheartedly and to not discriminate against other beliefs and religions before we learn about them, because if Constantine had discriminated against Christians, maybe he wouldn't have won the battle, leading to his reign as Roman emperor and ending Christian persecution.
Theodosius I was the emperor of Rome from 379 to 395. He was the last Roman emperor to rule over both the eastern and western parts of the Roman Empire. Theodosius made Christianity the official religion of Rome in 380. Making Christianity the official religion of Rome completed the reversal of the Christian church status. Theodosius also pronounced the Arian heresy illegal in 392. During his rule, Christians began to fight in the Roman army, and eventually, by the year 500, only Christians were allowed in the army. This is ironic because early Christians were pacifist and refused to fight. Theodosius greatly impacted Christianity by allowing it to grow as the official religion of Rome and encouraging more people to follow Christ. From Theodosius, we can learn to not try and change people, because if Theodosius had not had Christians fighting in the army, Christians could possibly still be pacifists today and religious wars could have been avoided.
Hello, children! Today I am going to tell you the story of the Gnostics, which also appears on notes number 3 of your notes packet. Please listen closely and enjoy. Once upon a time, on the continent of Europe and in some other places, during the early centuries of the Church's existence, conflict broke out among the Christians. Many splinter groups arose and challenged the Church's beliefs. The beliefs of these groups, which were contrary to essential Christian teaching, were called heresies, and those who believed in them were therefore called heretics. One of these groups to rise up were the Gnostics. These people denied Christ's human nature. They claimed that only spiritual things were good, and that all material things were evil. And therefore, because Jesus was good, he could not have had a human nature, making him only divine and claiming that his human body was only an apparition. They also believed that since God was so distant from material things, that meant human beings were very distant from God. They made the exceptions of themselves, however, saying that they had a secret knowledge of God and that they alone were granted salvation from Him. Because the beliefs of these people were very contrary to the teachings of Jesus' humanity, which appear in the Gospels and Epistles, many people opposed them. Among the people who declined the Gnostics' teachings was Irenaeus, the Bishop of Lyons, who probably opposed them the most. Despite the disapproval and repulsion of the Gnostics, the group was upheld by its believers up until about the year 200 AD, when it finally began to fall apart. In that year, something good actually sprang up from the formation of Gnosticism. In that year, many authorities of the church gathered together to put an end to Gnosticism. Together, they created the Apostles' Creed, the prayer which is the foundation of all Christianity and dictates the beliefs of all Christians. This prayer made a great impact in stopping the formation of heresies and created great clarity and unity within the church and its members. After this, everyone lived happily ever after. Sorta. For a little bit. Now, children, what can the story of the Gnostics teach us? It teaches us not to doubt the teachings of the church, especially those regarding Christ. It teaches us that, in order to be Christian, we must believe the teachings dictated in the Apostles' Creed, as they are the fundamental beliefs of Christianity. We must try to turn away from heresy and always remember the teachings of Christ and His apostles. The end.
Hi, I'm Maddie Ahern, and we are going to be talking about Arian heresy. So, Arianism was the belief that Jesus was created by God, and God would never be fully human, so Jesus can't be fully godlike. So he had to be a lesser god or a demigod, and so they doubted his full divinity. Now, this teaching arose in Alexandria, which is in Egypt, and it was by a priest named Arius, hence the name Arianism. And this meant a lot of resistance in the church, and the church started persecuting the Arians, and they would not agree with their sayings and their teachings. And we can learn from this that it is wrong to persecute others even if they have different beliefs than us. Thank you.
In 323 AD, a presbyter Arius proposed that Jesus must have been created by the Father. This meant that there must have been a time then when there wasn't a Son, because the Father hadn't brought him into being yet. Many bishops disagreed with this new belief. Our faith says that Jesus is human and divine. He was always there with God and the Holy Spirit. To settle this dispute, Emperor Constantine called for a council in the city of Nicaea. In 325 AD, more than 300 bishops met to discuss Arius' new interpretation. Eventually, the council decided that Arius was wrong, and because he refused to alter his belief, he was declared a heretic. The Creed, or Statement of Faith, was written to address this dispute. Today, this is called the Nicene Creed. It is recited at every Mass. After the council, some bishops and Christians followed Arius and his beliefs, but many still stuck by the old beliefs stated in the Apostles' Creed. This council gave our church the Nicene Creed that it has today. A lesson that can be learned from this event would be that even a topic that seems small or insignificant has a great impact on the church in the future.
Athanasius. During the Arian controversy, Athanasius, a bishop of Alexandria in Egypt, stepped forward in direct opposition to the Arians and their beliefs. Athanasius stated that Jesus is related to God, just as brightness is related to light. Jesus is the reflection of the light that is God. Athanasius was the 20th bishop of Alexandria and spent most of his life and work as a bishop fighting and combating the Arians. Of his 45 years, he spent 17 of them in exile during 5 different exiles under 4 different Roman emperors. You could refer to Athanasius as an apologist to the Arians because he spent most of his life in exile due to their political turmoil. And an apologist is a defender of the faith, and that is exactly what Athanasius did in trying to teach everyone that the scriptures reflect Jesus the way that we know him and the way that we should know God.
Hi everyone, this is on Ambrose and it's on Notes 5DI. So some background on him is there was an emperor who wanted an Arian for bishop, so Ambrose tried to break apart the angry crowd. The people then chose him for bishop even though he wasn't baptized yet. So then he was quickly baptized, confirmed, and given the Eucharist in a hurry. He ended up to be a strong leader with many followers, and even stood up to an imperial power. Some contributions he had were he focused on the right belief, and he helped shape what it means to be a Christian today. He helped make a strong theological tradition of what Christians would stand for, and he wrote some of the most important books for the church. He was a scholar and writer who helped people understand their relationship with God, but he is best remembered for preaching and teaching that inspired Augustine to be a Christian. Some lessons you can learn from him are stand up for your beliefs even if it is against a powerful person, since he stood up against an emperor. And initially he was a reluctant bishop of Milan, but his feast day is April 4th. Thank you.
Hi everyone, so today I'm going to talk to you about Augustine. Augustine was born in a region of North Africa, which was often called Roman Africa because the culture was filled with Roman practices. His father was a pagan and his mother was a devout Catholic. After a wild childhood and a young adult life, he took a mistress, like a lot of non-Christians at that time, and moved to Rome with her and his son. At the time of his move, he was a Manichaean, meaning he believed there was a God who controlled good and another who created evil, making no one responsible for their own sins. He opposed this view later on in his autobiography, The Confessions. When he moved to Milan later on in life, he studied Plato, met Bishop Ambrose, and began believing in one God with the help of his mother, Monica. This newfound faith made Augustine want to reform his life. His turnaround moment happened when he read a Bible verse from Romans, talking about living in God and the day and not giving in to vices. From this point on, he knew that his passion was to love God and serve others. Augustine was baptized by Ambrose and returned to his home in Hippo, North Africa, where he became a bishop. He used his intelligence in his writings that challenged the Donatists and Pelagians. He taught about grace and original sin, which his own struggles with alcoholism and other sinful practices made a very familiar subject for him. One of his famous lines, "Our hearts are restless, O Lord, until they rest in you," can relate to everyone today and then who is searching for fulfillment by showing them that God and His grace really are the answer to the temptations in everyday life. Thank you.
Hi ladies, so tonight we're going to be talking about Monica, which is number 5 in the notes packet. So Monica is the mother of St. Augustine, who was a devout Christian and who yearned for her son to convert to Christianity. She was born in North Africa and was brought up as a Christian. When her son Augustine was 16 years old, the family did not have enough money for him to go to school, so unfortunately he had to quit. Because he quit school, he resulted in visiting Protestants, drinking, gambling, and he became a Manichaean. A Manichaean is a person who believes that there are two gods, one that created good and one that created evil. Throughout this whole process of St. Augustine's life, Monica never stopped praying to God, asking him to help her convert her son to Christianity. Augustine eventually converted to Christianity through the teachings of Bishop Ambrose, the elected Bishop of Milan, and with the prayers of his Christian mother, Monica.
Hi everyone, this is Katie, and tonight's lecture is about the Manichaeans. This is in relation to number 5 in your notes packet, so just keep that in mind while you're listening. Alright, let's start. So, despite his mother Monica's best efforts, Augustine became a Manichaean. And if you were a Manichaean, you were a dualist, which means you believed in two gods. And they believed in one of darkness, which was responsible for all evil in the world, including sin. So you took no personal responsibility for your sins. It was because of the God of darkness. They also believed in the God of light, who was responsible for all the good. So you would try to live your life in relation to the teachings of the God of light. However, this posed an issue for Augustine because he felt like a very inadequate Manichaean, even though he didn't have to take responsibility for his own sins. Later, he decided to convert, but there's more of that later. Bye, guys. Have a good night.
Okay, hey ladies. Today we're going to be talking about Donatist heresy, and in the slide it'll be referred to at certain points as Donatism. So here we go. Donatism was popular in the 4th and 5th centuries during the persecution of Christians under Diocletian, and it was in the Roman province of Africa. So the Donatists did not believe that imperfect humans could do work for God, and we'll come back to this idea later. The Donatists viewed themselves as the true church and the only church to have valid sacraments, and they believed so strongly in this view that of the valid sacraments that the Catholic Church actually began asking questions about their own rules and whether or not an apostate can return to full communion. So going back to the belief that imperfect humans could not do work for God, the Donatists believed that, or actually they argued that the validity of any given sacrament depended upon the worthiness of the priest who administered it. So, for example, during Christian persecution, many Christians renounced their faith, and they were probably priests and bishops and just church members in general. But then, later on, as the priests and bishops went back into the church community, the Donatists believed that at this time, their sacraments that they would administer would no longer be valid. So the lesson we can learn from the Donatists and their different beliefs today is that all sins can be forgiven, and that the priest's faults and sins don't taint our own personal communion. So this was Donatist Heresy, number 6 on your note packet, and hope you got all the blanks, and have a good night.
Hi ladies, this is Jane, and today we're going to talk about a group of Christians called the Pelagians, which is found in the notes sections 7a and 7b. Pelagianism originated around the 5th century AD. Pelagians believed that people could get to heaven and be saved without God's help and love, which is called grace. Basically, Pelagians thought that heaven was earned through a person's own efforts. Pelagianism teaches that man's nature is good, and therefore it denies original sin. As there are with most heresies, there's a kernel of truth found in the Pelagians' teachings. In the Roman culture, there was an attitude of moral laxity, so the Pelagians tried to teach that people are responsible for their own actions, and that people cannot just leave their lives all up to God. But they took this teaching too far by denying the fact that we need God's grace to be saved, since we are powerless when trying to overcome our sinning nature without God's help. In today's culture, we sometimes assume that we can do everything by ourselves and that we don't need God's help, just like the Pelagians. We focus on trying to be self-reliant and don't like asking for help, when in reality, we need God's grace or His inner love and presence to help us overcome our sinning tendencies. Thank you.
Hey ladies, first off, a little back information. The Donatists were Christians who had their own churches in Africa for almost 100 years. They believed that the validity of any given sacrament depended on the worthiness of the priest or bishop who administered it. Augustine opposed the Donatists. Augustine's way of opposing the Donatists was through his writings about sacrament. First off, he recognized that those who administer the sacraments are never going to be perfect, and if you expect perfection of them, you will be disappointed. Augustine believed that a sacrament's validity came from God, not from how good or sinless the minister was. Through Augustine's influence, the Donatist position died out. St. Augustine believed that every religion, true or false, has sacraments, also known as visible signs. As for Augustine's views on the physical sacraments, he believed in the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. He also strongly believed in forgiveness through reconciliation and penance. Through Augustine, we learn that no one is perfect. He emphasizes that the Church is both human and divine. He recognized that although humans make mistakes, God is divine and decides a sacrament's validness.
Hey guys, this presentation is Grace Explained, and it's note 7c, d, and e. So to start, Pelagians were Christians that Augustine argued with because they believed that people could get to heaven without the help of God, that Christians call grace. They believed that getting to heaven was earned through someone's own work or efforts. This belief was true in a sense, but the Pelagians took it too far, denying the need for God's grace to save people, which was contrary to what many of the Christians from the Apostles' time forward believed. Augustine affirmed original sin in one of his writings, saying that humans have a tendency to sin, and they have since the fall of Adam and Eve. And he also says that without God's grace, humans are unable to overcome the tendency to sin alone. Augustine's main point was that the grace of God through Jesus Christ our Lord must be understood as that which alone men are delivered from evil, and without which they do absolutely no good thing. He argued that without God's grace, there would be even more evil in the world. And today, the issues of grace versus works, or God's power versus human effort, are still around. Our culture tends to emphasize the qualities of self-development, and we have the idea in our heads that we can do everything on our own without God's help, and that can keep us from living authentically with God, and can also be referred to as modern-day Pelagianism. So it's just important to remember that without God's grace, we will have a hard time to live authentically.
The idea of Nestorianism was based off of the teachings from the Bishop of Constantinople named Nestorius, who attempted to give a logical explanation on the human and divine essences of Jesus Christ. Nestorius taught that the humanity and divinity of Christ are two separate people, the man Jesus Christ and the divine Logos, or the Spirit of God. He explained that Jesus himself was a human, but the divine Logos eventually came to be in him. Nestorius also taught that because Mary had given birth to a human and not God, she was not Theotokos, or the Mother of God. Nestorianism was strongly opposed by St. Cyril of Alexandria, who helped outline the orthodox teaching of the Church, which was sent to Nestorius, accusing him of a heresy, or a belief or theory that strongly differs with the beliefs of the Church. Nestorianism was officially called a heresy after 2 councils and led to the Nestorian Schism, which was the separation of Nestorianism from the rest of the Christian Church.
As we know, the Nestorians taught and believed that Mary did not, in fact, give birth to God, but to a human. This was a very controversial topic during this time, and in order to absolve these disputes, Theodosius II, who was the emperor of the Byzantine Empire, called the Council of Ephesus in 431 in order to conclude the matter. Nestorius persuaded Theodosius to call this meeting, believing he would be proven correct, therefore proving St. Cyril incorrect and potentially having him condemned. At this council, there were 250 bishops in attendance. This was because this was such a controversial topic, many people wanted to voice their opinion at this council. During the span of the council, there was great tension, especially between St. Cyril and Theodosius. At the end of the council, they declared Mary is a God-bearer, or in Greek, Theotokos. From this council, the Church has realized that the Nestorians weren't completely inaccurate in their beliefs and ideas, because, when looked at in a philosophical way, we are able to better understand who Jesus is. This contribution to the Church helped us understand and presented problems towards the idea of a hypostatic union. This was the idea that Jesus has 2 natures of both human and divine. Today we learn that Jesus is a unique character by being both human and divine from the ideas presented at this council. From this council, we learn the importance of standing by your faith and having the courage to voice your opinion.
Hey guys, I'm here to talk about Monophysite heresy. This topic can be found in your notes packet in number 9, letters A through C. Monophysite heresy is the challenge or opposition to the doctrine of incarnation, or that Jesus is both God and man. There was much debate on this and whether Jesus was both human and divine, or just one of the two. People were taught that Jesus slowly became the Son of God, and other people were taught that Jesus was solely divine. These debates often ended in riots. Once, one even caused injury to the Patriarch or Bishop of Constantinople.
Alright, hey ladies, we are going to be focusing on the 10th bullet point in the notes packet. So if you could turn to that, and here we go. In 451, Pope Leo calls the Council of Chalcedon. Most of the bishops at the council don't agree with or they reject the Monophysite heresy. However, there are bishops that do believe in this Monophysite heresy, which is the idea that Jesus is only divine, not human and divine. Many bishops who believed in this Monophysite heresy were from Syria and Ethiopia, and they did eventually split from the church over this conflict. Today, these groups of Christians are called the Jacobite and Coptic churches. Chalcedon, another thing that came out of it was that it said that the popes or their advisors would oversee future councils. Since the early church, the Pope was seen as the first authority, and the bishops in Antioch and Alexandria were considered second in authority. The council upheld that the Pope was the preeminent or first in authority, but that the Patriarch of Constantinople would be second in authority. Leo was concerned that the Eastern Emperor in Constantinople would have too much power, too much influence over the church. So the politics and specific events following this eventually did lead to a complete break between the Eastern and the Western Church. So I think a lesson we can learn from the Council of Chalcedon is that that power in the hands of one man or two men can be a dangerous thing, and to remember, I think we have to remember that the church and her members are human, and the church is run by humans who do sin, and I think that it's important to remember that nobody's perfect. And yeah, so there you go.
We often refer to or talk about the Dark Ages, but do we really know what the Dark Ages were? The Dark Ages was a period of time in Western Europe that took place after the fall of the Roman Empire. During this time, Germanic tribes attacked and destroyed towns across Europe. This created a great sense of fear among people, and also led to superstition. The fall of Rome began in 410, when Western Rome began to lose land to the barbarians. After this, the East, the red part on the map on this slide, became known as the Byzantine Empire. This division of Rome also created a division in the church, and the church then started to divide between the East and the West. The falling of the Western Roman Empire and the weakening of the emperor created a power vacuum, which the Catholic Church would gradually fill. This is because the Church was the only stable and generally respected institution that could provide governance. This gain of power greatly impacted the Church. The Dark Ages allowed the Church to have a great impact on the spiritual and political needs of the people. From the fall of Rome and the Dark Ages, we can learn that geographical and political divisions have a great impact on the church and its growth and power.
With the fall of Rome and the Roman Empire, a vacuum of leadership was created. Because there was no emperor, the Pope, or Bishop of Rome, was gaining importance and was forced to step into leadership during the time of uncertainty, or the beginning of the Dark Ages. Leo the Great became Pope in 440 and was forced to be tough and courageous because the Roman Empire and the faith were under attack. The rule of Pope was becoming more complicated, and the Bishop of Rome was expected to be a statesman, spiritual leader, administrator, scholar, and saint all in one. The papacy was so important that Leo began using the title Pontifex Maximus, or the Supreme Pontiff. This title was previously used by the Roman emperors to indicate their roles as high priests. This title indicated Leo's great power, specifically in the western area of his empire. When Leo became Pontifex Maximus, there was a changed understanding of the offices of a pope. Leo was both a spiritual and political leader. Leo was also a peacemaker. For example, when Attila the Hun, a fierce leader of the barbarian tribe, invaded Italy, Leo traveled north and approached Attila unarmed. Attila turned back and Rome was saved. The Pope continues to defend Rome and the papacy gains more power. To summarize so far, Leo was a mediator between religion and politics, a leader, both spiritually and politically, and a peacemaker. In Pope Leo's time, a challenge to the doctrine of incarnation, the belief that Jesus is both God and man, was raised. An Eastern group claimed that Jesus did not have a human nature. The Council of Chalcedon rejected this group's notion, and they split from the main body of Christians. Today, this group is known as the Jacobite Church and Coptic Church. One effect of the Council of Chalcedon was that the bishops declared the Patriarch of Constantinople second in authority to the Pope. Leo objected to this because it would allow the Eastern Emperor to interfere with more religious matters. This led to many disputes between Christians in the East and Christians in the West. Eventually, there will be a complete break between these churches. One relevant lesson we can learn from Leo the Great today is that great leadership qualities include peacemaking, compromising, and mediating.
Hello, ladies. In this lecture, I will talk about the life of Antony of Egypt. This topic is covered in notes 20, 20a, and 20b. Antony of Egypt was one of the earliest monastics. He lived from 251 AD to 356 AD. When Antony was about 18 years old, both of his parents died, leaving him with a farm to manage and a younger sister to take care of. One day, on his way to Mass, Antony thought about how Jesus' apostles had sold their possessions and had given the money to the poor. The gospel reading Antony heard that day about Jesus' advice to a rich man really hit home with him. There is still one thing lacking. Sell all that you own and distribute the money to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come and follow me. Luke chapter 18, verse 22. Antony was inspired by these words. He believed the reading was a sign that he should do exactly what Jesus told the rich man to do in the gospel. So Antony sold his farm, gave the money to the poor, left his sister to live with a group of Christian women, and he left home to seek his destiny. In 270 AD, Antony retreated to the desert to seek a life of peace and prayer, living a life of a hermit. As Antony grew older, young people who had heard of his wisdom sought him out to be their teacher. Antony became rather famous for his acts of healing and wise teachings. As years passed, however, many people filled the desert, seeking Antony's wisdom and teaching. Antony, who had grown very old, journeyed further into the desert, seeking quiet away from the people. His final hermitage was on a mountain far into the desert.
In the mid-300s, Basil was a monk and bishop. He studied to become a teacher in Athens and Constantinople, but then moved to become a hermit in Asia Minor. Other men decided to join him, and he formed the first Christian monastery, a new way of life stressing simple living, eating only what is necessary, owning almost nothing, and obeying the abbot of the monastery. Basil found that a community was necessary to guide monastics on their path to God. These were Basil's basic rules for ordering the monastic way of life. Basil was also widely known for his opposition to Arianism, a movement that claimed that God created Christ at the same time as himself, but not completely equal to himself. Basil knew that this movement was untrue and he refuted it. We can learn from Basil that it is okay to try new things that are beneficial to our lives, because in doing that, we set a precedent for others to follow. Also, we can learn to stand up for what we believe in, just like Basil stood up against Arianism.
Jerome, who lived in the 4th century, was a monastic, studious hermit who contributed to the living legacy of the Church by translating the Bible from its original Hebrew and Greek into the vernacular Latin. This new Latin translation, called the Vulgate, was approved by the Pope and has been used by the Church for centuries. His task of translating took 40 years, and he became a doctor of the Church.